Welcome back to the Pragmatic Guide to Building Muscle. Today we are going to be going through quality control. If you're new to the channel, my name is Shane Story and we are at episode number 5. So if you haven't caught the earlier ones, go onto my channel and check them out because this one is going to make a lot more sense if you watch the preceding ones. If you have been following along, I would ask you a big favor. If you're not already subscribed, please click the subscribe button. If you have any questions during the video, leave a comment in the chat and I'll get back to you. And if you just like the videos in general and you want to support the channel, click like because it does help to boost the videos in the algorithm. Now, before we get into the meat of the video, we're going to go back to our training decision filter. We always have to look at our training decisions through this lens. Is the program specific enough to us and our muscle building goals? Is it something we can progress with over time and achieve overload? Is it something that is repeatable and enjoyable? And is it actually going to lead to results? The first thing we need to talk about when we go through these variables that we're going to discuss today, being tempo, rest, and effort, we need to ask yourself, what is the main goal of having these considered within our training program? So if you remember from early videos, the main thing that we're really trying to look for within our training program is a stimulus that's going to achieve muscle growth. And the primary thing that is driving the stimulus is going to be an increase in mechanical tension. So these variables that we're going to discuss today, they're in video 5 for a reason. They're not as important as everything that has preceded them. When we're looking at volume, intensity, frequency, they're going to be the backbone of the training program. We have our exercise selection, which is going to be how we distribute our training volume across the week and target specific muscle groups. And then we have our exercise sequencing, which is helping us ensure that throughout a training session that we are managing fatigue while getting the best quality stimulus possible. Now, with these variables here, they are not as important as what we've talked about. We think about these more so as quality control. So we want to take our tempo and our rest periods and we want to control these and standardize these as much as we can so we can let the other variables shine through. So first off, we're going to look at tempo. Now, you may have heard of tempo as time under tension. Some people will say that time under tension is a key variable to look at when it does come to growing muscle, but this is not necessarily the case. And we know this because when we look at low load training versus high load training, where we're doing high repetitions versus low repetitions, we see relatively similar muscle growth once we are pushing all those sets close to failure. Now, if time under tension was an essential factor for growing muscle, we would see that the higher rep training, lower load would lead to more muscle growth than the higher load, lower rep training, because those sets typically last a lot longer. But it doesn't seem to be the case when it's played out within the research. When you're looking at tempo and you see it in a training program, it's typically going to be written in a 4-letter sequence. Sometimes you might see it as 3. But when I'm writing a training program, I will typically write it in a 4-letter sequence. So I'll do the eccentric or the lowering phase where the muscle is lengthening. I'll do the fully lengthened position. I'll do the concentric phase or where we're lifting the weight. And then I'll do the short range position where the muscle is going to be contracted. Now, within that, there are infinite combinations of what you can use when it does come to the sequencing of those letters. But when you're writing that in a program, it can confuse a lot of people, and rightly so. Now, over time, I've stopped writing specific tempos within my training program because people start to confuse doing the exercise for a particular amount of seconds while taking away from something more important, which is effort. What you'll see when people have a specific prescribed tempo is that they focus too much on counting the seconds in the lowering phase, for example, or how long their concentric phase is going to be. And what ultimately happens now is that they are thinking too much about the timing of the rep and they're not thinking too much about actually being present within the set. What this can lead to essentially is distraction. And from my position, I don't think we should be looking at counting the seconds of our reps at all. And we even know that a pretty broad span of lifting tempos can lead to pretty good outcomes. And there are going to be some cases, such as like when people are injured, that maybe having a controlled tempo at certain points within the range of motion is very beneficial. But the most important thing to think about when we are looking at using a lifting tempo is demonstrating control. We want to ensure that we have complete ownership over the weight. And that's something when I'm looking at people's lifting videos that I am looking to see. I want to see that they are somewhat in control of the lifting portion. They're somewhat able to manage the transition from the eccentric phase to concentric phase, and they are ultimately lifting with intent. So tempo essentially is helping us to control the quality of the reps, leading to consistency across the set. When people are more consistent across the set in regards to the tempo they're using and they're able to demonstrate more control, this ultimately is going to lead to more tension where we want it, which is exactly what we're looking at when it does come to building muscle. An example here would be if you are doing something like a barbell squat and it's really uncontrolled and you're essentially letting gravity do its job, then maybe if you're looking to bias your quads, you notice that now your hip extensors are coming into the mix a little bit more. Another example here could be on a bicep curl. Most guys want to grow their arms, but when I've seen them perform bicep exercises, they are demonstrating absolutely no control or ownership over the load. Being able to exhibit some type of control in the lengthening phase ultimately sets you up for an easier concentric with the muscle that you're trying to train. If you just let gravity do its job and let the weight plummet to the ground, you might start to use a little momentum, start to bring more shoulder into the mix, or use other bodily movements to get the weight through the mid-range of the actual exercise itself. So what we're not looking for is specific timing of a rep. What we are looking for is the same rep and the same feel. As you get closer to failure, you will have your concentric speed of the reps start to slow down. So your lifting portion should slow down. Under the hood, your muscle is producing more and more force to try to overcome the load. Now, when this happens too, what we see is an increase in mechanical tension. So that is the main benefit of having tempo within our training program. I don't think we should be looking at specific timings again and writing down specific numbers, but we ultimately want to be in control of the load. We want to have consistent repetitions across the set because that's ultimately going to lead to more tension and having repeatability across the entire set. Now, you will have some arguments in regards to controlling the eccentric the more because we are going to be typically stronger there, up to 40%. But here's the thing. When we're looking at increases of mechanical tension, we're considering both the eccentric as well as the concentric. If you slow down your eccentric too much, what you will find is that you won't be able to complete as many repetitions across the set, or you may have to reduce the load. That is going to go against what we're really looking to achieve across the set. Considerations here, of course, are if you have some body part that is injured or you're having a niggle in your shoulder, your knee, or whatever. If you control the eccentric a little bit more, you may find that specific niggle is not as achy during the set. So this is a consideration if you are working around injury, that you can use tempo as a means to still work around an injury and get a good quality set. However, it won't be as good as if you weren't injured, but again, that's the consideration we have in place. And in opposition to the eccentric, we have concentric, which is the lifting portion. Now, you may see on some programs that they have a timed concentric, where it's said that you need to do this concentric for 3 seconds, for example. Now, that goes against a lot of research, which would indicate that if we perform an explosive concentric or explosive lifting portion, that we're going to be producing more force and ultimately will lead to more repetitions, and ultimately that will lead to more mechanical tension. When we try to perform the concentric or lifting portion for a slower amount of time, ultimately we produce less force across that repetition, and that's not what we want. Whereas the faster concentric is going to lead to more activation and more recruitment of high threshold motor units, and over time as we get through the set, this is going to give us a better chance of reaching a high proximity to failure. And finally, we also have to consider our exercise decision filter. If people are doing a program which is hyper specific with a lot of different tempos, it's going to be very difficult to adhere to because people are going to be counting seconds versus actually just staying within the set and focusing on what truly matters. It's also going to be quite boring. I don't know if you've ever done any programs that have multiple different timings across different exercises and multiple different rep durations. Ultimately, when you do have too much going on, people end up having to lift really light. And most people, when they come into the gym, if they're able-bodied, they don't want to be lifting light. They want to go in there and lift some big-ass weight. To finish off tempo, ensure that you can control the weight through all the ranges, that you're able to exhibit consistency in your rep quality across the set, and that ultimately is going to lead to what we're truly after when it does come to our training, which is more mechanical tension, leading to more muscle growth. That brings us on to our next variable, which is rest periods. Rest periods are ultimately to help us improve performance across the training session. There are old stories and old myths in regards to hormone circulation when we take shorter rest periods. But ultimately what happens when you take really, really short rest periods is that we are not able to produce enough reps or as many quality sets across the entire session because we haven't given ourselves enough time to recover and a good ability to perform within our next set. The most important factor across the rest periods is that we are able to perform the next set with the same level of quality that we performed the previous set. When it does come to muscle growth, it's not about hormones. What it is about is mechanical tension. When I'm writing a program, I give guidance on how long people should rest for. And that's more so to encourage people to rest more so that they can prioritize their level of output across the session and perform well within their actual sets, and are able to repeat those sets with the same quality as the previous one. Because a lot of people will fall into the trap of resting for short periods of time because they're maybe in a rush, they have maybe too much volume within their session, or they've heard that they will get a better pump when they do it, and then they start chasing the pump versus chasing what truly matters, which is achieving that high stimulus across the set, which is that slowdown in contraction speed, which is leading to mechanical tension. Now, when I prescribe rest periods, I'm going to break these down into two major categories. Exercises, which you may need to rest for up to 3 to 5 minutes, and ones where you maybe only need to rest for 1 to 3 minutes. So a category where we have exercise where we're resting for maybe 3 to 5 minutes, these are our higher skill movements. They're going to be our major compounds, or any exercise that you find particularly fatiguing. If you rested for any longer, that you wouldn't be able to perform the next set with the same level of quality. We're going to have other movements where we may only need to rest for about 1 to 3 minutes. Now in the lower end, we can look at things like unilateral movements. So if I'm training a single arm dumbbell preacher curl, I might only need a minute and a half before I go from this arm into this arm. A minute and a half after my second arm, and then go back into the next one. And again, this can be varying on the rep ranges used too. The lower rep ranges may use a little bit more rest time between the next set, so you're adequately recovered. Other movements you can put in here are going to be things that are a lot more muscle centric, or even more machine-based movements or stable-based movement parts. They may only need you to rest up to that 3 minute mark and not necessarily go much more over it. However, I don't necessarily want you to just think that just because it's a machine-based movement or an isolation-based movement that you couldn't do more rest. You have to listen to what your body is giving you in regards to feedback. If you feel that you can't come into the next set with the same level of performance, you will need to rest a little bit longer. Now, you'll know you had a long enough rest if you can come into your next set and perform at a similar level. A big sign that you have not rested long enough is if you come into your next set and you notice your reps cut in half, or you have to reduce the load massively to perform to a similar level of effort. So this is a very important consideration if you're looking and assessing your training, that you may need to rest that little bit longer if this is happening to you. One consideration we can put in place here is if you are somebody who doesn't have a ton of time in the gym, you won't be able to rest for the longer rest periods of 3 to 5 minutes. Now, this could just be a case that maybe you just adjust your exercise selection to put in movements that you can recover from a little bit more effectively, or you may need to do a few more sets. While you will have a time to train doing those extra sets, it will make up for some of the lower quality work that may occur from having the short rest periods. Because when we're thinking about the short rest periods, it's not necessarily a case that they are worse for muscle growth at all. Like, we're talking about sub 60 seconds. What really is the issue here is that when people perform the short rest periods, they are failing not necessarily just because their muscle is no longer to exert more force. It is likely a case that some cardiovascular component is letting them down, or as we talked about with talking about higher repetitions back in video number 2, that their pain threshold just can't keep up with how difficult the actual set is, and that's taking them away from being able to stay within the set and get towards those closer proximity to failure. Now, if you were truly tight on time and you weren't able to perform sets with those longer rest periods or even the 1 to 3 minute mark, you can still get quite good benefit and quite good muscle growth for employing some intensity methods or advanced training methods, the likes of rest pause sets, the likes of drop sets, the likes of MyoRep sets, and they will still allow you to get a good level of benefit if you are tight for time, versus having to do multiple sets, which will decrease in quality the more of them you do, especially with shorter and shorter rest periods. But we'll get into intensity methods in full in a later video. Now, the final point in the video is going to be effort. We're standardizing our tempo, we're standardizing our rest periods so that we can maintain a high level of effort. What we're really talking about is proximity to failure. Proximity to failure is us reaching a point where our muscle is no longer able to exert enough force to overcome the load that we're placing on it. However, it is important to distinguish between different types of failure. First up, we got task failure. Task failure is when we are no longer able to meet the demands of the lift that we're doing. And that can be taught as simply as we're performing a barbell squat. Maybe when you're doing a barbell squat, your quads have more juice in them. They can continue to produce force, but your glutes or your adductors or your lower back, they've had enough. At this point, no matter how much juice you have left in your quads, you will not be able to meet the demands of the lift and you will fail the repetition. And this, in essence, is task failure. It's going to be far more likely that we're going to reach task failure when we have a lift that is very high in skill level, or we actually don't have a huge degree of skill ourselves for a specific movement. And when we're training in the gym, we want to ensure that we're absolutely trying to stick away from task failure, because it is going to be contradicting our goal of keeping up the quality of our repetitions. The more we start to reach task failure, and the more often we start to practice actually failing because our technique is failing, it is the case that we're going to ingrain poor motor learning over time. And this is going to have downstream effects to your ability to gain more muscle, as well as it can also lead you to just directing that force towards other areas that you don't necessarily want it going towards. Now, if you have lifts in your program and you enjoy lifts in your program that have a high level of skill, it is important that we are maybe coming a little bit further away from failure on those specific sets, because we know that maybe other muscle groups are going to take over. And then that's when we need to look at complementing it with exercises which are going to be able to reach momentary muscular failure. Muscular failure is pretty simple. Your muscle, as I said at the very start, proximity to failure, is no longer able to exert any more force to overcome the demands of the lift itself. We can think about this in more stabilized exercises, because they're going to be areas where we're going to have less task failure, and we're going to be able to ensure that the tension is being directed where we want it to happen. This is ultimately what we're trying to work towards within all of our exercises: momentary muscular failure. Because when we get to this place, that's going to mean that we've reached a high degree of mechanical tension, we've got a high level of stimulus, and we're going to be more likely to have built muscle across that set, or at least have directed enough of a signal to our muscles to adapt and grow. And what that will look like as you go through a set is your first repetitions, you're going to be going through nice, controlled, consistent reps. But as you start to reach momentary muscular failure, you're going to start to notice a change in rep speed. And you might notice this from maybe 5 reps away from failure. Your reps will start to get slower and slower until you essentially reach a grinding halt. Now, what's happening here is your muscle is producing a high level of force. And as we produce more and more force and are really trying to fight against that weight, the reps are going to have to move slow. Our bigger, faster muscle fibers are starting to kick in now, our big type 2 muscle fibers, and they're sending a massive signal to try to overcome the weight we're applying to ourselves. And that's also something that's important to understand. When we're looking at high forces, that'll move at slow speeds. And when we look at low forces, they'll move at faster speeds. So that's one thing to keep in mind, especially when you're thinking about those reps that are earlier on the set. The reps earlier on the set, we're not actually producing as much force as we are as we get later into the set, which is where this is very important, because we know it's at those high forces and those close proximities of failure that we're driving more of this mechanical tension. This high level of force production is internal load. This is why higher repetitions and lower loads, and high loads and lower repetitions can still lead to good levels of muscle growth. Because as we do those higher repetitions and those lower loads, we're still getting to the same place if we reach muscular failure. By the time we get to the end of the set, those type 2 muscle fibers are starting to kick in, the rep speeds are starting to get slow, our muscle is now undergoing a good degree of internal load, and that is ultimately leading to the endpoint that we're looking for. So all roads within these variables, it all leads back to this big factor down here. We want to ensure our training is optimized and it is controlled to be able to drive this signal. Can we increase mechanical tension? But we want to ensure that when we look at them, that it also fits within our training decision filter. Is the tempo, the rest periods, the effort level, is that specific towards our muscle building goal? Is the tempo and rest period create an environment where we can progress the stimulus across time? Is the tempo and rest period leading to repeatability across the session or week or meso cycle? Is it leading to enjoyment and adherence of our training? And is it something that's going to be effective? You can see that we can be pretty damn flexible with these 2 things here. They're not things that we need to overly think about or plan for, because ultimately it all comes back to control, consistency, and developing tension for tempo, as well as being able to have repeat performances with rest periods, and that all leading to higher loads of effort, and that leading to more of the big factor, which is a stimulus, mechanical tension. So that's it for this video. I hope you did enjoy it. And I know there was a lot of repetition in this one, but it's important to drive the message home. If you have enjoyed these videos, could you do me a big favor and leave me a like? If you are not subscribed yet, please do consider subscribing. And if you have any questions, any comments, any of your own theories, please do put them in the comments below. I look forward to having a discussion. So that's it for this one, and I'll catch you in the final one where we're going to talk about progression methods.